Welcome to the podcast. Are you guys following the news? Really, I mean, come on, who cares at this point? Can we move on? The news is it's such a cave wall illusion, isn't it? Just tell me who the president is and, I'll pay my taxes and everybody will be happy. Today's episode is on the Upanishads. And actually, it's on the Upanishads, but I'm going to try to do the second half of this episode sort of note-free and actually just do some thinking about all this stuff. Because what have we got? We've got, this will be the 11th episode. We've got a bunch under our belt. There's a long ways to go. But see if we can start to synthesize some stuff. First, in case I have not explained clearly enough my interest in ancient Hindu scriptures, listen to this abstract from a paper published in the journal Phronimon in 2007 by Andrew Domansky titled Eleatic Monism and Advaita Vedanta, Two Philosophies or One? He writes, and by the way, before I read this, Eleatic monism is basically Parmenides' philosophy, although also this Melissus of Samos guy. And Advaita Vedanta is basically the core Hindu teaching about oneness found in the Upanishads. So this guy says, in this article, the monistic ontology of the Eleatic school of ancient Greece is examined in juxtaposition with the non-dualistic Advaita Vedanta philosophy of India. The Eleatic ontology is studied through the texts of, firstly, Melissus of Samos, and secondly, Parmenides of Elea. The characteristic features of Advaita doctrine are gathered from Upanishadic texts and the writings of Sankara. This comparative treatment demonstrates that being, with a capital B, as described in the Eleatic fragments, is practically identical to the capital S, self, or Atman, which lies at the heart of Advaita doctrine. So close is this identity that the two ontologies, the Western and the Eastern, can for all practical purposes be treated as one. In the absence of convincing historical evidence to show that the one ontology exerted a direct influence upon the other, the ineluctable conclusion is that knowledge of the one being, or self, the immortal essence and true common identity of every creature, was attained independently, if not indeed contemporaneously, by sages in archaic Greece and in ancient India. This conclusion, moreover, has vital practical significance at the present time. The Eleatic Vedantic ontology is arguably the key to healing many ills which beset our age. End quote. Now, as I mentioned in some of the episodes on Plato, Elea is in Italy, and so it isn't necessarily the only or the original strain of Greek philosophy. That is, it's not Athens, But it is, for certain, one of the fountainheads. Plato's dialogue, the Parmenides, which I hold in my hands before me and will read to you from in a minute, shows that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, by extension, all knew Parmenides' work and studied it carefully. And of course, the Parmenides dialogue features Socrates talking to Parmenides. So, whether that was fictional as a literary device just to put these two in dialogue, or they actually met, hardly matters, right? If nothing else, they were exchanging the idea. The use of the term "the one" persists from the time of Parmenides and Heraclitus was writing over in Ephesus in Turkey around 500 BC, all the way through to Plotinus, who was writing in Egypt in the 3rd century. So you've got at least 800 years, everywhere from Turkey to somewhere south of Rome and Egypt, so all around the Mediterranean, and they're all talking about this thing called the One. Simultaneously, almost exactly, is when the set of tracts known as the Upanishads were being composed in India. Now, there's some sort of dispute about dating these. the fact is, it seems that like Hindu ideas go back much deeper than this, and the Upanishads are at least said to be kind of like the summation of even more ancient wisdom than these. So they were written down anywhere from, estimates go from about 800 to 200 BC, but apparently like there was an oral tradition building to these for maybe 1,000 years before that or more. I mean, I've heard reports that they say that there are, even to this day, gurus in India who are chanting the ancient prayers, and the language has so shifted since then that they don't even know what these syllables mean anymore, but they're just faithfully transmitting them one generation to the next, something like that. So the tantalizing suggestion in all of this, for me at least, is that these ideas arose in concert with each other, taking, I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? Like taking only somewhat different names to reflect local dialects, but in fact that these ideas were not so different, right? I mean, to my mind, it seems likely there was some serious exchange of ideas taking place even as early as the time of the pre-Socratics. I mean, and it's like, who cares? I mean, what's more extraordinary? The fact that they arose separately, independently, spontaneously, or that they were, exchanging ideas across these thousands of miles in ways that, like, most modern scholars will suggest that we can't be sure about that. Okay, so listen to this clip from some Hindu guru guy talking about the one and the many. It's about 1.5 minutes, so buckle in. But this, again, this is the central problem of pre-Socratic philosophy. They talk about it all the time. And so to hear it in, like, sort of rephrased in Hindu terms, I think is very interesting and helpful to me.
It is the one becoming the many. As rain, you can say, falls on a mountaintop, what happens? Well, all the rainwater runs down from all the sides. And if it is raining and raining, then what happens is the water runs down in various rivulets down below, and they disperse over and over again. What has actually happened? That rain has a quality of one. It is water. And that water has now become dispersed. It has become rivers and streams and waterfalls and cataracts, and we have the whole bunch. And this is actually what has happened. So this illustration has been given to show how the one appears as the many. It is true that there is an underlying unity. When you see all the forms of water everywhere, you know it's water. Some water is muddy, some water is polluted, some water is clean, some water appears blue, and some green, and some large and some small. Water is a wonderful element, and whenever you see it, that's water. But that's not meant for drinking. Like Sri Ramakrishna says, everything is...
Yeah, so the image he gives of the rainwater falling on the top of a mountain and then dispersing, compare that to, here's a chunk from the Parmenides dialogue from Plato, where they're talking about the forms. And you remember the stuff in the Plato episodes where we were talking about the forms and how each individual thing partakes in the forms and so on. That's what they're talking about. So Parmenides says, "Does it seem to you that the whole form is in each of the many things while still being one? Or how's it go?" And Socrates says, "What prevents it, Parmenides, from being one?" Parmenides says, "Although one and the same, then its whole will be in many separate beings at the same time, and so it would be separated from itself." And Socrates says, "Not if it is like a day, which, although one and the same, is many places at once, and is not at all separate from itself. In this way, each of the forms could be one, the same, and in all things at once." And then Parmenides sort of jokingly says, "Socrates, how nicely you make one and the same thing many places at once. It is as if after covering many men with a sail, you would say that it is one whole over many. Or is this not what you meant to say? And Socrates says, that's fair. Well then, would the whole sail be over each man, or a different part of it over each different man? A part. Then, Socrates, the forms themselves can be partitioned, and the things that partake of them would partake of a part. The whole would no longer be in each, but each would possess a part. So it appears. Well then, Socrates, are you willing to say that one form can, in truth, be partitioned by us and still be one? And Socrates has to admit, no way. And so this goes on and on for much of the whole dialogue. It's usually not people's favorite Platonic dialogue, but it's mine. Because this is, yes, it takes sort of work and it's no fun, but like, this is the what does he call it? I think he calls it like a workman-like game. That's Parmenides' description of the dialectic. It's like, yes, this isn't supposed to be fun, and it's not something that like you're going to be told, and then it's like now you would get the answer right if you were on Jeopardy, and that's all there is to it. No, it's not a trivia question, right? Like what's happening here is through the study we are transforming minds. So that's the idea. That's kind of where this is all going. And again, that's in Parmenides. That's in Plato. That's in Greece that we're talking about. Okay? So, okay. Like I said, we needn't get carried away with the parallels because it's perhaps even more interesting to imagine that these two strains of thought evolved separately and simultaneously. So whatever, one way or another, super interesting. Now, there are something like 100 Upanishads in existence, but most collected versions, if you order a book, will give you like the 10 or 12 most important. Among these, and one that's usually always anthologized in those collections, is the Chandogya Upanishad. So if you're going to read only one of them, and you should, it would only take 20 minutes or so, I suggest starting with that one. But first, to set the tone, a little chunk from the Isha Upanishad. Quote, "In dark night live those for whom the Lord is transcendent only. In night darker still, for whom he is immanent only. Those for whom he is transcendent and immanent cross the sea of death with the immanent and enter into immortality with the transcendent. So we have heard from the wise." Wow, isn't that amazing? Okay, so the Lord is transcendent and immanent. That is to say, he is, eternal in space and time and also manifested in a body. So we have heard from the wise. And there it is. The wise have told us. Here, wisdom is not some slippery and non-quantifiable term of flattery. It specifically denotes a person who has learned to see the reality. Just as Plotinus, 1,000 years later, refers to the visionary as the proficient, with a capital P, and uses that term as a technical label for those who have come to know truth. The Upanishads uses the term to refer to those who know about truth, about the One, about God. This isn't a matter of faith, any more than it was faith when Moses was speaking to the burning bush. This is a matter of experience. Just as in the last episode Arjuna finally saw Krishna himself, the wise man must experience this unification with the One in order to be considered, and indeed in order to be, wise. A little bit of water helps. The Katha Upanishad involves one of these awakened ones trying to explain to a normie how to attain this revelation. The Guru says, "When the five senses are stilled, when the mind that is called the highest state by the wise," Sorry, let me start that over. I wrecked it. Shoot. When the five senses are stilled, when the mind is stilled, when the intellect is stilled, that is called the highest state by the wise. They say yoga is this complete stillness in which one enters the unitive state, never to become separate again. If one is not established in this state, the sense of unity will come and go. The unitive state cannot be attained through words or thoughts or through the eye. How can it be attained except through one who is established in this state, oneself? You guys, I love this stuff. I love it. Go seat yourself in your darkest corner of your house in a closet or something and rewind that and put it on 0.5x and pause it after every line and think about it. The point is, you cannot be told about enlightenment. And this is, enlightenment, liberation, moksha. This is their salvation in Hinduism, right? This is the most important thing. You can't be told about it. You have to get it for yourself. It reminds me of that famous first line from the Tao Te Ching. Quote, "The way that can be spoken of is not the true and eternal way." So it's like you can get a PhD in the Upanishads if you want, but it will be of no use unless you realize oneness in yourself. Let me finish that excerpt from the Katha Upanishad. There are two selves, the separate ego and the indivisible Atman. When one rises above I and me and mine, the Atman is revealed as one's real self. Whew. Man. I think that these texts do not bring one to enlightenment. What they are is broken branches in the forest, to analogize here. Subtly broken branches that you will not recognize the first time you enter the forest. And you have to enter the forest, all by yourself, without a map, at night, if you want this most valuable thing. It's only in the morning, after you've found it for yourself, that you will see in the clear light of the sun the broken branches and recognize that, yes, others have been here also. I am not alone. And then the text is those broken branches. The texts will confirm for you that your revelation was true. But they cannot catalyze the revelation. You don't recognize until after you've found it yourself. That is to say, you're not accruing any merit listening to these podcasts. These podcasts will only be valuable to you after you've punched on through to the other side, unified with God, thought you've gone crazy, and then recalled, wait a minute, I think I remember hearing Meister Eckhart and Alan Watts and who else? Julian of Norwich and everything in William James and this podcast by some guy named Casey called Godward, and they were talking about a sense of oneness. Okay? All right, well, speaking of Alan Watts, listen to this little chunk from Alan Watts. He's one of the great internet talkers, but I've got him on 1.25 here, I think, just to save us a little time.
The basic position of the Upanishads is that the self is the one and only reality without a second, that all this universe is finally Brahman and appears to be a multiplicity of different things and different events only by reason of Maya, which is illusion, magic, art, creative power. So then, it is basic to the Vedanta that Brahman, this intangible, non-objective ground of everything that exists, is identical with the ground of you. And this is put in the formula tattvam asi. T-A-T, tat. Same as our word that. Tvam, T-V-A-M. Same as the Latin tuus, thou, asi, art. We should translate that into a modern American idiom as you're it.
Yeah. Man, okay, so there's a lot going on in here. Like, I hope that you are able to sort of like pause and think about like what like this, first of all, should seem quite strange to you, you know? If you're just kind of drinking it down, you're either already enlightened or you're, there goes my coffee. Or, you know, or you're like taking it, you're not, it's like you're skimming the surface. You're not really pausing to think about how strange this stuff is. But it is super strange and weird. Because if we are talking about the one, and I think Parmenides focuses on that one because he's the most, he's convinced that's the most perplexing. Well, the one is something like God or reality. And the problem is, you know, well, which is it? We tend to say in the West, right? Because we have this idea that like reality is like the physical world, but then God is this kind of transcendent thing above the physical world. But what Socrates and Parmenides would say is like, well, no, that breaks reality into two. I mean, which is the most real of those two realms, right? Which is the actual real one? Actually, it calls me back to the last episode on Bede, too, a couple of episodes ago, where it's like, you know, I love the idea of an enchanted worldview, but the problem is that once you start having miracles, you've really kind of broken reality into two. It's like there's like normal everyday reality, and then there's these events that happen that kind of violate the rules of that reality. And so it's like it sort of breaks the universe, which is the, you know, obviously with the prefix una is supposed to indicate that it's all sort of one thing. It breaks it into like two. And this is what we're trying to avoid with all this talk about oneness. Okay, I said my favorite was the Chandogya Upanishad. It's said to be, I think, maybe the earliest of these, or almost the earliest of the Upanishads, and that means it was probably finally written down somewhere between about 800 BC and 300 BC, which, you know, to me sounds almost like it's exactly during Heraclitus's lifetime, which is amazing, right? Because that's what Heraclitus and Parmenides were debating all the time at 500 BC. You know, is the universe one or is it many? And what are the implications if we go either way? But it's very hard to try to have it both ways. This Upanishad begins with an opening prayer, which gives you some idea about the intention of these. It says, "Lead me from the unreal to the real. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to immortality. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti." Hey, you know what's amazing right now? Do you guys have, pausing, do you ever like, have you ever had, what do they call these? There's a word for this when, what do they call those? There's like, certain people will have animals that they feel like, oh, totem, right? Like a totem. You ever have an animal that like feels like he's a sign to you? I've had a couple. Like the praying mantis for sure is one for me. Probably owls. And then also those green little lizards. And for the last 3 minutes, one of these green little lizards has been sitting there on the window. He's actually caught, but somehow he got inside the screen and the window. And so he's sitting there in the sun about 6 feet away from me, social distancing on the window, just being green and listening to our talk about reality. And I don't know, you guys, that could be a coincidence, but it could be a sign. It could be a miracle. Okay, so anyway, the Chandogya Upanishad, it begins first of all by talking about the sound Om, which is interesting actually. It's said to have 3 sounds within it, the A, the U, and the M, I guess, and yet it's one sound, right? So we've got the sort of Trinitarian version of Omism happening here. And then finally, you know, there are a couple of dialogues in the Chandogya Upanishad. And, excuse me, the first one is, I'm going to sort of skip over, but it's good, it's interesting. It's some old, guru guy talking to somebody named Satya Kantam Satya something. But the second one I like better. It's called The Story of Shvetakatu. Shvetakatu was Udalaka's son. When he was 12, his father said to him, "It is time for you to find a teacher, dear one, for no one in our family is a stranger to the spiritual life." So Shvetakatu went to a teacher and studied all the Vedas for 12 years. At the end of this time, he returned home, proud of his intellectual knowledge. "You seem to be proud of all this learning," said Udalaka. "But did you ask your teacher for that spiritual wisdom which enables you to hear the unheard, think the unthought, and know the unknown?" "What is that wisdom, father?" asked the son. "As by knowing one lump of clay, dear one, we come to know all things made out of clay, that they differ only in name and form, while the stuff of which all are made is clay. As by knowing one gold nugget, dear one, we come to know all things made out of gold, that they differ only in name and form, while the stuff out of which they are made is gold. As by knowing one tool of iron, dear one, we come to know all things made out of iron, that they differ only in name and form, while the stuff of which all are made is iron. So, through that spiritual wisdom, dear one, we come to know that all of life is one." What a dad this is, right? First of all, before I continue with that, isn't that interesting that the dad sends him away to learn the spiritual wisdom from someone else first? Even though apparently he's a master, he knows it. But just like in the Greek tradition, you have to have sort of a mentor, right? Like you have to have an older male figure to sort of shepherd you into adulthood, or else you won't learn its sort of sacred lessons. Shvetakatu says, "My teachers must not have known this wisdom, for if they had known, how could they have failed to teach it to me? Please instruct me in this wisdom, Father." "Yes, dear one, I will. In the beginning was only being, one without a second. Out of himself he brought forth the cosmos and entered into everything in it. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the self supreme. You are that, Shvetakatu. You are that." So Tattvam Asi. And then what he does here is he goes into a number of examples, and always the same refrain. So let me read you a couple of them. Udalaka says, As the rivers flowing east and west merge in the sea and become one with it, forgetting they were ever separate rivers, so do all creatures lose their separateness when they merge at last into pure being. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the self-supreme. You are that, Shvetakatu. You are that. And every time Shvetakatu says, "Please, Father, tell me more about this self." It's like he's kind of an idiot. Like every one of these should be enough to completely blow your mind, Shvetakatu. Why do I have to keep going, Strike at the root of a tree. It would bleed, but still live. Strike at the trunk. It would bleed, but still live. Strike again at the top. It would bleed, but still live. The self, as life supports the tree, which stands firm and enjoys the nourishment it receives. If the self leaves one branch, that branch withers. If it leaves a second, that too withers. If it leaves a third, that again withers. Let it leave the whole tree dies. Just so, dear one, when death comes and the self departs from the body dies, but the self dies not. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything, he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the self-supreme. You are that, Shvetakatu. You are that. "Please, Father, tell me more about this self." Yes, dear one, I will, Uddalaka said. Place this salt in water and bring it here tomorrow morning. The boy did. Where is that salt? His father asked. I do not see it. Sip here, how does it taste? Salty, father. And here, and here. I taste salt everywhere. It is everywhere, though we do not see, or though we see it not. Just so, dear one, the self is everywhere, within all things, although we see him not. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the self supreme. You are that, Shvetekatu. All right, so there's many examples of that, but man, I love that. I would also, I would mention here a couple of other things. First of all, I think the first time I heard about all this stuff was in J.D. Salinger's book, the Franny and Zoe. And apparently, I remember hearing when he died in about 2012 or so, or maybe it was like 2014, that they were going to publish, he had a whole, Salinger was, I'm not going to say a Hindu, but he was really into these Vedas, into the Upanishads and stuff. And so apparently he wrote a whole tract, a whole book on the Vedas that someone has, and they're just waiting to publish, I guess. But the reason it's interesting is, aside from the one mention of it in Franny and Zoe, where it's not mentioned at all in the one about Holden Caulfield's Catcher in the Rye, it makes perfect sense to me, because Salinger's worlds are so they're just they seem so mundane. Actually, they seem so this world, and yet I love them. There's this something suffuses these worlds where the green lizard always shows up just right at the right moment, or the golden scarab, as what's his name, Carl Jung would say. Listen to this chunk in the King James Version of the Bible. See if I can, pull up, read full chapter. This is in John chapter 10. And it's when it says, so for instance, Jesus walked in the temple of Solomon's porch. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, How long dost thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you believed not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But ye believe not, because ye are not of my sheep, as I said unto you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father which gave them me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. So, what in the heck is going on here, right? In verse 29, he says, my Father is greater than all. Well, this is perplexing, no doubt. If you're reading this without any Christian instruction, this is very perplexing. Because it's okay, so he's not his father, right? We wouldn't even use that language normally. How is one one's own father? It implies separation. It implies two-ness. My Father is greater than all. And that includes me, evidently, right? Without him, I can do nothing. This implies a separation. But then verse 30, he says, I and my Father are one. And, verse 31, then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Really, rightfully so, right? Because everything they had learned in their history was that you can't claim that. That's a heresy. That's a blasphemy. But Jesus answered them, many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of these works do you stone me? And the Jews answered him, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy. and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. And verse 34, which he's quoting from Psalm 82:6 here, he says, "Is it not written in your law, quote, I said, you are gods," end quote. And then Jesus continues, "If he called them gods, unto whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified and sent into the world, thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God?" Anyway, this is perplexing, and like I said, I don't know exactly what's going on here. But like when Jesus says, like he says, if I do not the works of my Father, believe me not. But if I do, though ye believe not me, believe the works, that ye may know and believe, and that the Father is in me, and I in him. There's this incredible, it's exactly chapter 11 from the Bhagavad Gita sort of thing, where Jesus has known and understood and entered into God, right? This is the perfect unity has happened. Now, in like the Christian tradition, we are, the orthodox position is to say, only Jesus did this, or at least Jesus did this first or something. But in fact, I mean, this is why studying the Upanishads is so interesting, because it gives you a sense that this sort of language was in circulation in India and also in Greece at the time when Jesus is saying this stuff. And so, the stuff where it's like, where Jesus says, I hope that I can't remember, I think it's in John 14 or 15, I hope that you'll be one in me like I am one in my Father, so that we can all be one together or something. It's like, this is very Vedic style language, which isn't to say, that you have to claim to be God, or that you have to think that the Upanishads are Christian or any of that stuff. I think it just gives me some sense that these things are more mysterious than people have generally the capacity to hear. And I think part of what happens is, you can only tell a 5 or 10-year-old sort of such heights, right? There's a lot going on. And so how do you explain about God to a 7-year-old? I mean, the God who, like I said, who, revealed himself to Moses or to Melchizedek or to, Joan of Arc. How can a 5-year-old understand this? And so, it's hard for them to understand it. So we read them the stories, and, we get it into their head that, Jesus was the Son of God, and they kind of remember that, and this, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. And if you keep saying that there's nothing wrong with that. But the history of religion is the history of people who have punched through the normal, those stories, who have broken free of the childhood stories and of even the what do I want to say? The embodied rituals, the language of it. There's always this experiential element to it. And I'm talking in Christianity here, not just in, other religions, but in Christianity, it's always that. And so as I've said in, previous episodes, I just think, again, it's not for everyone. It doesn't have to be that everyone has, goes into the cave and sees God. But, it's our priests, at the very least, need to be doing that. I remember hearing this story a while ago from Wade Davis. He's this anthropologist guy, about a culture in South America where I can't believe this is even real. This must be fake now that I think about it. But he said that what they do with with some of their young boys is, I think he said when they turn 5 or something like that, they couldn't be that early, but maybe 12, but 5, I think they said. They take them into a cave, and the boys live in the cave for 10 years or 12 years or whatever. And they have a job in there or whatever, and they just pass the time in the cave. And during this time, they are also studying the mysteries. They're learning from the teachers, and the teachers are telling them everything that they know about the world. The teachers are telling them about the animals, about the cycles of the stars and the moon, and about the sun itself and all this. And then finally on their 18th birthday or something, on the day of their initiation, maybe it's when they're 13, they are finally brought out early in the morning before sunrise and sat on top of a hill with their teachers. And the teachers say, watch now, watch. And as the boys watch, the sun rises over the crest of the hill and shines in their faces. And they see it for the first time in a decade. And the birds are chirping and the crickets are talking around them. And it's like everything their teacher said is shown to be, by experience, is shown to be real and true, and not just something that they studied in books, but now it's real. And somehow, I don't know, I've always thought, it's not probably worth it to do that to people for 10 years. But what an image, isn't it? All right, I'm kind of running out of voice and content here. But do think about the one. Do think about you could think about it as the self, right? How is the self the self? I mean, are you the same self that you were when you were 5 years old in kindergarten? Your body is bigger, you've got bigger words, bigger ideas, you've had all kinds of different experiences, all of the cells in your body have been replaced. You could even change your name, right? All these kinds of things. And so in what sense does the self endure as a single thing? And then it's also you have the problem of the self and the universe. And if the universe exists and it is one, as it seems to be in some sense, we call it a universe because it's all kind of bound together. But how is it then that the self is separate from all that? I mean, do you want to propose that your little self is the only thing separate from the other giant big thing, which is the universe? Because that doesn't make much sense, right? So these are the what do you call, the slalom poles that we ski between in the dialectic. And it's not that you're supposed to answer these and kind of figure it out, but that you're supposed to feel the disorientation that happens. And eventually in that process, the ego just washes out and you're supposed to have this glimpse for a moment of the whole, but you're not glimpsing it from your own perspective. It's it just is. And there's no you, or you're everything, and these boundaries kind of weaken. And that's the sacred experience in, well, as Joseph Campbell would say, in all religious traditions, I suppose. What should we do next time on the show? Next time, how about, I've been meaning to get to the Iliad, just so we can talk about analogies and metaphors a little bit. And I want to do for the Iliad just basically nothing but read similes to you. That's my lifelong dream, is to have a podcast and to just read similes to an anonymous audience. Here's the outro music, which I keep getting a copyright strike on, even though this is just an 1896 recording that's not copywritten, whatever.